But there was a question that was asked yesterday, and I promised you an answer today. So we're going to hear from UUA Legal Counsel Tom Bean, who's going to tell you if one of the things that you wanted to do was ensure, for example, that we had information added to the G rule, the new G-2.3 on gender identity, how that would happen. In other words, how do you get any piece of business on the GA agenda? So if you would please give a warm welcome to UUA Legal Counsel Tom Bean.
How many of you have one of these books? I think it'd be really helpful if you could open it to page 101. And I'm going to walk you through the process as best I can of how you would propose an amendment to a G rule so it gets on the agenda for next year's General Assembly. Everybody on page 101? Good? Okay, take a look at section 4.11 in the lower left-hand corner. Tentative agenda for regular General Assemblies.
I need to bother you for just a second.
Go for it.
I engaged in a piece of wishful thinking. We do have one more voting item after this, and it's not just the recess, it's the debate and vote on proposed amendments to section 7.7, 7.8, and so on. So, just a thought. Back to Tom.
Thank you. Okay, so at line 274, and this is going to be a little tedious, and I apologize, but I want you to understand how you can take the initiative, you, your congregation, your district, to put an amendment to a G rule on next year's General Assembly's agenda. Line 274, the Board of Trustees shall prepare a tentative agenda for each regular General Assembly, which shall include. Now go down to line 286, E2. There are three ways that delegates or districts or congregations can come together to get an item on the General Assembly tentative agenda. E2, not less than 15 certified member congregations by action of their governing boards or their congregations. Okay? 15 certified member congregations at least. Or a petition by not less than 250 members of certified member congregations with no more than 10 members of any one congregation counted as part of the 250. So you'd need at least 10 people, you need 10 people from 25 congregations, or fewer than 10 and more than 25 congregations. So you get at least 250 signatures. Go to F. Proposed amendments to rules and business resolutions submitted by a district by official action at a duly called meeting at which a quorum is present. And I'm just speaking to the rules. Okay, so there are three ways that all of you can propose an amendment to a G rule that it gets on the tentative agenda. Not less than 15 certified member congregations, a petition not less than 250 members with no more than 10 from any congregation, or district action. Okay, everybody good with that? Okay, go with me to the next page, page 102, because we were talking about the tentative agenda. So, go to section 4.14, the final agenda. The Board of Trustees shall prepare a final agenda for each General Assembly which shall include, and go to A at the top of the next page, all reports and other matters required by these bylaws to be submitted to the General Assembly, and all proposed amendments to bylaws and rules appearing on the tentative agenda that meet the requirements of G 418.3. So, if it's on the tentative agenda, it goes on the final agenda so long as it meets the requirements of G 418.3. Everybody good with that? Many of you I see are already doing what I'd like you to do. Turn to page G 418.3 on page 118. So G 418.3 deals with congregational polls, which deals with business resolutions. So we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to focus on that's not going to be relevant to establishing an amendment to a G rule. But what is important to you, or what are important to you, are G418-1, which is, gee, when do I do this? When do I get these signatures and submit them to the UUA? G418-1, by November, whenever in the fiscal year the GA opens in June, each certified member congregation and district shall be notified of the dates of submitting items for the tentative and final agenda, the procedure to be followed, and the forms to be used. So, by November of every year, by this November, you should be notified of what you need to do to get an item on the tentative agenda. And there will be instructions and guidelines on how to do that. If you comply with that and you get it on the tentative agenda for a rule amendment, it'll go on the final agenda. Now, I want to direct those of you who might act by district action to Rule 418-4. Because you remember, a district can get something on the agenda, and we had a proposal this year, as I recall, from the Southeast District. In the event that a proposed amendment to a rule or to a business resolution that was submitted by a district is to be considered a general assembly, the district that submitted the proposed amendment or resolution may, in accordance with its own procedures, designate a representative to speak in support of the amendment or the resolution. Okay? So, a district can submit a rule and then designate someone to speak in support of the amendment to that rule. Everybody with this? So, what's the date by which you're going to get something from the UUA that tells you how you can put an amendment to a G rule on there? And what do you need to do when you get that? Read it and follow the instructions. And then you need to get the signatures that we looked at, right? So many certified, 15 certified member congregations, 250 people with no more than 10 per congregation, or a district coming forward and submitting that amendment. So, if any of you want to submit an amendment, a proposed amendment to that G rule on non-discrimination, to add gender identity or change it in any way you deem appropriate, take that form on November 1, read it, and follow the rules in that instruction. Everybody okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I recognize the delegate at the procedural microphone.
Barbara Atlas, a delegate from the UU Church of Long Beach, California. Now that we are establishing regions and congregations who are members of regions won't be members of districts anymore, all of this language gets a little bit confusing, doesn't it?
That's actually not true so far, because the congregations, I mean, right now we're in the place where the congregations that are members of districts, of regions, are in fact also members of districts. Is there stuff to sort out as we make changes? Yes, but we're all good. We're all good for next year and the year after. Do I have any other procedural questions right now? Okay.
My name is Bill Sasso. I'm a delegate from the Carbondale Unitarian Fellowship. I'm appreciative to the, I guess it's a point of personal privilege or something. I'd like to point out that the date by which resolutions submitted for the tentative agenda need to be received by the UUA is February 1st, and that many district meetings are held after February 1st.
Yes.
And call that to the delegates' attention as they consider this. Thank you.
Thank you. As a matter of fact, I believe only 2 districts hold their meetings before February 1st. Thank you.
Joyce Moore, First Parish, Waltham, Massachusetts. I really appreciate that explanation, and there's a lot of good stuff we can do. But since we were discussing the issue of language for 6 years, did you say? I did notice that on page 101, the item that wasn't discussed is if we don't want to do it ourselves, the Board of Trustees or the Executive Committee can put it on the agenda. Might we trust that that's going to come back on next year's agenda for us to do the inclusive language?
I had encouraged that, and I actually said I believe you should trust the board on this because because they're in the hall and they hear you. But it's also true that I can get excited about stuff being placed on the agenda by congregations and districts too.
Yes, thank you.
So, it's good. And yes, procedural microphone in the hall.
Yes. I'm Terry Wiggins from the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee. My question is, how is that information that is to be received by the congregations on November 1st distributed? Is there a mailing, or is it an email, or how do we know who to ask at our congregations for it?
Gosh darn, that's a great question. How would we know? And I'm going to need to turn to the administration for this to find out how that information is distributed in November. And here comes, and I thought we wouldn't get to love her up one more time, Executive Vice President Kay Montgomery.
It traditionally comes from the Planning Committee, and we will follow up to make sure that happens. I don't think that there's a Planning Committee member here who can speak to that, but the GA office will make sure it happens.
And it usually happens by mail, right? Not email.
That's right.
Physical mail. Thank you. All right. We're now going to move to the debate and vote on proposed amendments to Section 7.7